Hello, it's Joseph, and welcome back to my Colonizing Kerbin series, and we are on episode 20, and today's episode is starting out back at Duna very briefly, where if you look on the screen, I am showing you how the controllers are set up. You'll have to pause to see how they are set up properly, but if you really want to look at how the propellers on the drone are set up, check out Billy Wynn Jr.'s video that I linked in the description of last episode, and I'll also link in this description as well. He does a great job showing you how to set up that drone. So while the drone is continuing to do some scientific studies where the colony is eventually going to be established, we have had an alarm for the Jool relay network, and it has finally arrived in Jool, but as soon as it did, before it could perform its scheduled burn, another alarm went off telling us that back at Kerbin, another Jool transfer window has opened up. So the Kerbals are going to take this opportunity to launch the Laythe surface base into orbit and send it on its way. Now the Laythe surface base is the same design as the Duna surface base, but since it is going off to Laythe, we decided to use the booster to fully circularize its orbit around Kerbin to maximize the amount of delta V in the main craft as it heads off and its transfer towards Jool. Now, because of that, the booster is not going to be able to slow down its deorbit, so it's going to be a bit of a rough ride for the booster, but the deorbit burn is going to be a very shallow one to maximize the chance of this craft surviving. Now, a few explosions just went off. Thankfully, that was just a few air brakes that were destroyed. If you hit F3 while you're playing Kerbal Space Program, it will show you what was destroyed. And air brakes are a lot cheaper than Mastodon engines, so it's okay that we lose a few air brakes. They're very, very, very cheap thing to replace on this booster, and it is now touching down safely on the ocean of Kerbin, though it wasn't able to stay upright, but thankfully the parachutes were able to let it land safely. All right, so now we are having the Laythe base perform its maneuver out to Jool, and while it is doing that, I do have to mention that the Kerbal Space Center has been very busy with all these launches. So busy, in fact, that our training program is having trouble training our staff for all of these mission control groups that have to be created every time a new launch is happening. So things are pretty hectic here at the Kerbal Space Center, but we are going to continue to press on. The plan is to send our colonists on the next Duna transfer window, and in another transfer window or two, we'll be sending our colonists off to Laythe. So we gotta get these things out there in order to prepare for the colonists. So there goes the base off towards Laythe, and we are going to time warp forward and get back to the setting up that Jool relay network. So here it is now. It is passing by Eeloo and is using the gravity of Eeloo to capture its orbit around Jool. So now that it has done so, we can do a little bit of an alignment burn so that the orbital alignment is in line with Eeloo, which is at about the equatorial line of Jool. However, that was when I noticed that the craft was going in the opposite direction that I wanted. I wanted its orbit to follow the orbital line of the rest of the planets. So the cheapest way to do that is to have a high apoapsis, and then at the apoapsis perform a retrograde burn and flip the orbit around. I decided that since we have 30 ion engines, we can just use those ion engines for the rest of the alignments for the orbit. But then after that burn was complete, we had an alarm, and the Eeloo mission has finally arrived at Eeloo after 5 years and 235 days. Man, that's a long time for these three Kerbals to be cramped in that command module, which isn't even linked up to the lander to give them extra space. Though I'm sure Sally, our scientist, who is out performing science high above Eeloo, probably snuck off to the lander whenever she could to get a little bit of relief from the other two. I can't imagine how cramped they are in that module. This orange upper stage, once it has finished jettisoning its fuel, is now going to be separated, and we are going to leave it as debris in orbit of the sun. There was no way to crash that on Eeloo without expending a ridiculous amount of fuel, which would have meant that the Eeloo craft would not have been able to get back to Kerbin. As much as these Kerbins are looking forward to getting to Eeloo, they do want to eventually get home. So once the capture burn has been done with the nuclear engine, which has a pretty efficient engine, the periapsis is lowered to 20 kilometers, and it is going to eventually circularize its orbit at 20 kilometers above Eeloo. But before it will do that, another alarm has gone off, and we are back at the Jool relay. The ion engines, there's not enough electrical charge to do this in one burn, so that it's going to take 2 burns. But essentially, the dive orbit is set up to where the periapsis is at 80 million meters. That is going to be the orbit at which we circularize each relay. But we need to bring the apoapsis down to 98,618,196 million meters. And as each relay passes at apoapsis, they will perform a retrograde burn to bring their orbits down to 80 million kilometers. And with each pass, the relays will be spread out evenly across the orbit. And that will be 6 relays total in orbit between Tylo and BOP's orbital lines. Now, there is a section of the orbit that could come kind of close to BOP's sphere of influence, but since BOP is at such a angled inclination in comparison to the orbit of the relays, there is no risk of the relays falling into its sphere of influence. All right, once again, back at the Eeloo mission, the 20 kilometer orbit has been achieved, and Sally is out once again performing science. But while she is out there, she noticed there were some problems with the fuel lines. And Sergio, our engineer, which we originally were thinking was probably overkill bringing Sergio along, but he's out here earning his pay and his seat on this mission by flipping the fuel lines around so that the fuel will drain from the side tanks into the central tank and maximize the delta V of the craft. And the plan is, if necessary, the craft will jettison those side tanks as it returns to orbit after it has landed. Unfortunately, Sergio was not done performing maintenance on the lander, and Mergany lost track of time and panicked, thinking it was time to jettison the lander and begin the mission. But Sally had overslept. Her alarm had not gone off. So Sergio was in the lander and Sally was not. So Sergio and Sally just swapped places using their jetpacks. Sergio, as an engineer, does not have the training to reset the mystery goo and Science Junior whenever he lands. So with Sally in the proper place, she is now descending down to Eeloo, and about 6,200 meters above the surface of Eeloo, she begins her deceleration burn and touches down safely on the surface of Eeloo. And with that, Sally Kerman is the farthest Kerbal from home. On her way down, however, she was noticing that despite the fact that the fuel lines are now facing the correct direction, for some reason the side tanks are still not draining into the central tank. So she drained the fuel from the side tanks into the central tank. There's still some left in the side tanks, and has locked up the central tank to make sure that when she ascends back to orbit, there will be no problems. And now, after gathering all of the science from the Babbage Patch biome, she is now going to plant a flag to commemorate this occasion, being the farthest Kerbal away from home at Eeloo, the farthest planet out in the system. Congratulations to you, Sally. Job well done on a 5.5-year journey to get out here. That is amazing. You should be so proud of yourself. So she is going to return to the lander can and catch some shut-eye, since we're about to go onto the dark side of Eeloo. But as soon as we get back to the light side of Eeloo, Sally is going to jettison a rover that we brought along. And this rover is going to allow her to travel to other biomes. She landed close to a couple of other biomes and is looking forward to using this rover to... Oh, I'm sorry, everyone. That's really loud. Hey, Sally. Sally! Sally! Can you turn that down? I did it myself. Sorry, everyone. We were tied into Sally's helmet radio at that moment, and she has decided, since she has been cooped up for so long, she's going to blast some music. And we have no complaints here at the Kerbal Space Center. We're not going to chastise her for that decision. After all, she is very far away from home. She has been cooped up for very long. And because of the new 1.12 update in Kerbal Space Program, the wheels on this rover are locking down pretty well, so she gets to fly across the surface of Eeloo at a pretty good clip, though we recommend not going faster than 20 meters per second because there's still a risk of destroying the rover. So on her way to the next biome, she found a nice chunk, performed some science with the science arm, and gathered a sample. And right now she's planting a flag in a new biome, the Midlands biome. So we have all the same science materials except for the science junior as she has on the lander. So she's going to perform all the science experiments, including gathering a surface sample. And then she also noticed a brown boulder nearby and is going to deploy the science arm to run some more experiments. Unfortunately, she was not able to gather a sample from this boulder, but still, that's a pretty decent amount of science. And unfortunately, the limitations of the rover came through here. Sally was planning to continue on to more biomes, but she needed to take a break and let the battery recharge. The fuel cell, there's no fuel on this rover, so it was not able to charge the battery. And since we're so far away from the sun, the solar panel is not doing a very good job of recharging the battery. So once we got to about 200 some units of battery power, she returned to the lander and called it a day and returned to orbit to redock with the mothership. Once redocked, all of the liquid fuel from the lander is going to be transferred over to the mothership, and as much monopropellant as possible is going to be transferred back to the lander. The lander doesn't need that liquid fuel. And now they're going to hang out for another 115 days until they get their return to Kerbin transfer window. And so while that is happening, we are going to return back to the Jool relay, where the second burn is going to be bringing the apoapsis down to that 98 million meter apoapsis line that we needed. So the transfer module is no longer needed, and it has jettisoned all of the relays. And the first relay is now performing its retrograde burn with the ion engines and to bring down the apoapsis to equalize it at 80 million meters. And as you can see, plenty of xenon gas left. These relays have a ridiculous amount of delta V, way more than necessary to circularize their orbits. So when we got to about the fourth relay, that was when another alarm went off. And that alarm is telling us it is time to launch the colony ship for Duna. However, you will not get to see that this episode. You'll have to tune in to the next episode to see the Duna colony ship. So we'll see you in the next episode for that. Anyway, back to the relay, continuing to circularize the relays and equalize at 80 million meters. When we got to about the fifth relay, as it was about to perform its burn, we got an alarm saying that the Eeloo crew needs to start preparing for their return to Kerbin. So all that monopropellant in the lander is going to, well, not all of it. In fact, a fraction of it is going to be used because it only takes 5 meters per second to lower it down and have it destroy itself on the surface of Eeloo. And since the mothership now has all that extra liquid fuel from the lander, it was able to realign its orbit to an equatorial orbit and then use its RCS thrusters to raise the orbit up to 43 kilometers to give a little bit of wiggle room. Since Eeloo is pretty close to the alignment node with Kerbin, we were actually able, and we're also at the transfer window, we were also able to basically get the Eelooship to have a straight trajectory path back to Kerbin. So it's actually going to be faster for this crew to return the Kerbin. It's going to take about 1 year and 377 days, which is nearly 2 years, since there's roughly around 450 days in a Kerbal year. So a much faster return. I'm sure this crew is very happy to return home faster than it took to get out here, and they deserve it. They have done a great job. Praise to them. And there they are finishing off that burn. It took about 2,100 meters per second. And you may be thinking, since Eeloo is so far out, how is it that we were able to do it with such a roughly cheap burn? Well, like I said, we're at the transfer window and we're pretty close to the alignment node with Kerbin. And here we are once more back at the Jool relay. The 6th relay satellite is finalizing its circularization, and we are going to perform some science that we brought along here with the relay satellite just to kind of scout out the Jool system in preparation for the colonists. And the transfer stage is now realigning its orbit so it can crash onto the surface of Eeloo. So as the craft descends down and gives us a fabulous explosion on the surface of Eeloo, that's going to wrap it up for this episode. We've had 3 big major steps occur in this episode. The Jool relay has been established, the Laythe surface base is on its way to Jool, and the Eeloo mission is on its way home. And next episode, we are going to take our final steps towards colonization of Duna. See you next time, and thank you for watching.